Hello and welcome to the report of the final round in the BPB Limburg Open. And at the beginning of the round we have 6 leaders and all playing each other. So we had Sadler playing Sokolov, we had Bauer playing Bogner, and Ernst playing Pruijssers. And we were really hoping for exciting chess and fighting for the tournament victory. And well, they didn't let us down. We saw 3 amazing games and also 3 decided results. So there's plenty to show. And the first one winning his game and assuring himself of at least a shared tournament win was Pruijssers in his game against Koen Leenhouts. And I'm just gonna jump to the interesting part of the game. Well, the entire game was interesting, but the most interesting part of the game. So the opening was a Dutch defense, and after move 11, it's white to move here. And Leenhouts decided to play d5 because he wanted to try and create a weakness on d6, which is what he did. So the d6 is a backward pawn now, and he just wants to put pressure on this pawn. So he goes rook d1, knight e4 to protect the pawn, knights are being exchanged, queen c2, and bishop e6. And now white is simply trying to exchange the knight on e4, because this knight is defending the d6 pawn, and as long as the knight is there, it's going to be very difficult to win the pawn. So he goes knight d2, knight g5, and actually he goes back to f3 to make the d file available for his knight, for his rooks again. Now black went knight f7, and white played rook d2, a5, and here white figured it's pretty difficult to remove the knight on f7. And as I mentioned, with the knight on f7, winning d6 is close to impossible. So he goes for an interesting idea, which is h4, a4, and a knight g5 to simply exchange the knight. But probably this was a bit too wild, because he's weakening his king side quite a bit. And black just exchanges on g5 and goes for f4 immediately, putting direct pressure on the king side. And now there's no more pawn on h2 to capture back if black decides to take the pawn on g3. And also this pawn on a4 is already quite annoying, threatening to take on b3 at some point. So black is really attacking on 2 sides of the board, while white is a bit too slow to put enough pressure on d6. So he does try rook d1, white takes on g3, and probably the best move for white here is to simply capture back on g3. But as you can imagine, it's not a pretty sight to have these pawns here in front of your king. So Leenhouts decided to just go for it, and he took on d6, but this is probably a mistake. Black takes on f2, the king goes to f1, but the king is never going to be safe anymore, and at this point Pruijssers played very well. He calculated very accurately and found, well, not the best moves, but there's so many good moves here for black. So he went bishop f5, still finding good moves obviously, queen c3, but of course checking with the engine in such a position is quite unfair, because it's way too complex. So he took on b3, white takes on c6, queen e7, white takes back the pawn on b3, and black takes on g5. And as you can see, there's so much pressure against the white king. And there are some ideas with, you know, bishop e4, threatening queen g1 with checkmate. So it is very troublesome here for white. So white goes rook c7. Now if bishop e4, white can still take the bishop on g7. And if king takes, you can exchange the queens on e5. And then grab the bishop on e4 on the next move, and white is doing more than fine actually. So rook c7 is still holding it together, but after bishop f6, bishop e4 is threatening, and white simply couldn't find a good move here. So he played queen f3, but now e4 is just winning by force, and Roland did some good calculations here. White took an f6, queen takes, and I thought at first that white could take the pawn on f2, but simply rook a1, and there will be too many threats to the white king. For example, just to show you one line, if white takes on a1, queen takes, queen e1, black simply plays bishop here check, and the white king has to move, and black will simply capture the queen, and will also checkmate white pretty soon. So white could not take the pawn on f2, and that is of course bad news for white. So he played queen e3, but still rook a1 is coming. White took on a1, queen takes, take on f2, and now he just, as I mentioned a few times before, he calculated very good. He played bishop d7. If the king walks away, simply queen e5 check, just winning on the spot. So bishop f3 was the move. He took with the pawn, takes on d7, he took on e2 with check, forcing white to take with the king. And now it was quite easy. Queen f1 check, king d2, rook f2 check, king c3, pinning the queen. White went for a lot of checks, but as you might expect, the king simply running away to the safe square g3. At this point, Lennart decided to resign the game. And Pruijssers managed to get on 6 out of 7, and he was, well, just waiting for the others and see what happened there. So the next one winning his game was Christian Bauer against Sebastian Bogner. And that was quite a, well, interesting game, because it wasn't clear who was actually playing for the win for a long time, because Black's position seemed fine. And let's just jump to where I think, well, let's jump to this position. So Black is doing fine, even though he is under slight pressure. But White has a bit of a strange position with this pawn on a4 and the king on c1. It's a strange combination to cast the queens and then put your pawn on a4. So Black here maybe should have tried to develop his queen, because we'll later see that might have been the problem in the game. But he played knight e4, queen e3, and he decided to grab the pair of bishops because he was afraid that would be too strong. So knight f6 was played, rook e1, rook e8, queen g3, which is a very clever move because it probably prevents queen c7. I'm saying probably because the position is still a bit complex. The reason for queen g3 is that now White has to move knight d4, and the knight's going to jump to f5, which is obviously a beautiful square, really helping the attack on the king side there. So Black decided to go bishop c6, taking the weak a-pawn, and here Bauer made a very practical decision. He played knight d2, simply giving up on the a-pawn and trying to bring his knight to the king side, or at least put some pressure on e5. So Black went queen c7 now, because knight d4 is not an option anymore, of course. So knight c4 was played. Bishop takes a4. Now rook takes e5. And Black played rook c8 and knight e3, and the knight is still going to jump all the way to f5. And with the knight on f5, you can see the Black king is in big trouble. And at this point, Black just collapsed. He played bishop d7, bishop c4, very good move, targeting the f7 pawn, which is much weaker than the h7 pawn, which is just protected by the knight. So he switches diagonals here. King f8, because, well, he was obviously quite scared of rook e7, putting even more pressure on this f7 pawn. So king f8, queen f4, and it is quite simple. He just wants to push the g pawn to g5, and, well, what are you going to do about it? Black played b5, bishop a2. Look at this knight, first threatening to go to f5, but now defending the c2 pawn so it doesn't get checkmated. Very, very strong knight on e3 there. So Black went a5, but Black is way too slow. g4 was played, h6, now g5. Simply cracking open the Black king side, queen takes g5, rook e8, f4. Here there are many ways to win the game, but f4 is just one of them. Rook takes e5, pawn takes, knight g8, rook g1, g6 is the only move to prevent queen takes g7, but now bishop f7 and the entire Black position just collapsed, and Black resigned the game here. So Bogner just had a decent position out of the opening, but he didn't manage to free his pieces and get active, and Bauer was just quick enough to launch his attack. And, well, good tournament by him. He missed a few chances, but still he scored 6 out of 7. And sharing the lead with Pruijssers, and awaiting the game between Sadler and Sokolov. He probably is satisfied with this tournament. So let's go to that final game, Sadler against Sokolov, and that was a long, long game. They just made the most of it, and I'm just going to jump all the way to the end game, and I'm going to jump to the position after. Now let's get to the position after move 56. So we just skipped the part where Sadler won a pawn, and he did quite some maneuvering to optimize his position every time. And at this point he decided it's time to break open the position with e4, because he needs to do something with this extra pawn. So e4 was played, and simply Black cannot take, because bishop takes e6, king takes e6, and knight c5, winning the rook on b7. So after e4, black with rook a7. Rook takes, queen takes, he takes on d5, pawn take, and now he simply created a pass pawn. So now his extra pawn is really worth something at this point. He goes knight c5, knight c7, bishop a4. So the entire game Sadler had been trying to play for the win without taking any risks. So Sokolov didn't really get a chance to create any sort of counterplay. And that was a pretty good approach to the game in my opinion. And he just continued this approach, just playing a few moves and slowly making progress. So he took on e4, pawn takes, queen c6, king e7, bishop c8, f5. And here I think he just went a little bit too quick. If he really wanted to keep control of the position, I think it would have been wise to play like queen d7. Sorry, queen d7 here. King f6, queen d6, king f7. And now play another prophylactic move like king h2 just to get your king safe. Because as long as the knight is here, the queen is, well, stuck there to defend the knight. So you can slowly improve your position by playing king h2. And maybe continue with bishop d7 and slowly push your b pawn. That looked like a very safe way to win the game. But instead he played the move d5. And now I think he missed black's next move, but I'm not sure, but I think he missed it. Black went queen e1 check, king h2 and queen e5. And suddenly the queen is very active. And also black might be threatening all kind of pawn moves to, you know, put this white king set under pressure. So white played queen d7 check, king f8. Queen d8 check, king f7, and they're already in time trouble, of course, so it's not easy for them to find the right moves. And at first I thought he played queen d8 check because he wants to push the d pawn, because if he pushes the d pawn right here, black just goes knight e8 and simply winning the d6 pawn. So it was kind of logical to go queen d8 check, king f7, and now push the d6 pawn. But he didn't play this move, and it looks quite easy. But still it is pretty scary, because after knight e8, you have to push d7, black goes knight f6, and you already got to keep an eye on knight g4 check. And if the king goes to g1 or h1, it's checkmate on a1. And if the king goes here, knight takes f2, it looks like a perpetual. So white only has one move here, which is queen b6, protecting this f2 pawn, so the knight cannot take the pawn on f2. But now queen a1, threatening knight g4 with checkmate. White has to play a3, and well, this is apparently winning for white, but still I can imagine it's difficult to calculate, and I don't think he really trusted this line. So he went for queen d7 check, king f8 and bishop b7, but now suddenly it might not be winning anymore. Black played knight e8, and he's gonna manage to blockade the pawn on d6. And white decided to exchange the queens, and that probably was a mistake. But once again, maybe the position scared him a bit, and he was still worried about something like this. And his king is in big trouble, or can be in big trouble at that point. We exchanged the queens, but as you can see, he totally lost control of the endgame here. Queen takes, pawn takes, king e7, bishop c8, knight c7. He played the move f3, and here Sokolov didn't have enough time to calculate the endgame, but simply taking the pawn on e6 would have just drawn the game, because if white takes the knight, king takes, the pawn endgame is just a draw. I will just show you the moves. It's just a matter of calculation, it's not too difficult, because black has to grab the b pawn, white goes for the e pawn, but black is just on time to capture both white pawns before white manages to advance his pawns, and this ends in a draw. So black could have already grabbed the pawn on e6. Instead he played e3, king g1, and now you're too late with taking the pawn on e6. So g5, f4, pawn takes, knight d5, b5, and still the endgame is totally unclear in my opinion. I'm not sure. During the commentary I wasn't sure who was winning. I still felt white had pretty good chances here, but it looked very difficult compared to the position we had like 30 moves ago. So here Sokolov made, I think, the final blunder. He played the move king d8, and I'm just gonna try and explain you why this is a mistake, but it might be a bit complex, but I'm still going to give it a try. He played king d8, bishop d7, h4, king f1, knight takes f4, b6, and here black really wants to go something like e2, king f2, because he wants to grab as many pawns as he can, right? The more pawns he exchanges, the closer he gets to the draw. So knight takes g2, king takes e2, knight f4 check, king f1, and he would love to sacrifice the knight on e6 and then collect the b pawn, but he simply can't reach the pawn because these squares are blocked. So now let's go back 7 moves just to show you why this is so complex. Where he went king d8. Let's imagine he played h4 in this position. Once again, you should really prevent g3 because that's protecting the f4 pawn, so h4 is a very good move. Now let's say we just play the same moves. Let's say we go bishop d7. Now I just want to show you the difference. So in the game he went king d8, but now let's go king d6. White goes king f1, take on f4, b6, e2. Oh, pretty forced. King f2, take on g2, king takes e2, knight f4 check, king f2, and now you can take the pawn on e6. And after bishop takes, the king is here and not here, which means you can just play the move king c6 and actually draw the endgame. A very subtle difference, but very important for the evaluation of this endgame. Now there are many more lines that can be interesting, so do analyze this yourself. It is very interesting. But I just want to show you the key difference of why he should not have played king d8. So let's walk through the game, see what happened. We've seen these moves before, b6, and now he didn't play e2 because simply it's not possible. He went knight d5 and he tried to create a blockade. King c7, knight e7, f4, but actually he can't really achieve any blockade. Knight g8, king e2, knight e7, king d3, bishop f3, and simply the white king is just going to enter the black position. King d4, and the king is just going to e5 and just going to collect these pawns. And the black king is tied down to the b pawn, so he's stuck over there. And the knight is stuck to the e pawn, so the king pretty much can do whatever he likes. And the only thing that might be relevant is if black goes e2, for example. Bishop takes to distract the bishop, grab the b7 pawn. But white can just take the pawns, and the king is just cut off from the king side. So after king g5, white can grab the h pawn as well, and with 2 pawns this should be winning, even though I'm not entirely sure, and it's still a technical task, but that should be enough. So after king d4, black played knight g6, and here simply king e4 winning the game, because now also you can't really take on b7, because king f5 check winning the knight. So Sokolov resigned after king e4, and Sadler, wow, what a struggle, 94 moves, but he managed to win the game. Even though he just let it slip away at some point. But still, very interesting game, very tough fight by both players. So that means we finished the tournament with 3 winners. Sadler, Bauer and Pruijssers. And Pruijssers just had the better tiebreak to clinch the overall tournament victory there. So congratulations to him, but also to the other players who finished first place. And this was the last report of the tournament, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to thank you all for watching.